in the comments section that some of you didn't realize you didn't subscribe. So if you could do me a favor and double check if you're a subscriber to this channel, that would be tremendously appreciated. It's the free thing that anybody that watches this show frequently can do to help us here, to keep everything going in this show in the trajectory it's on. So please do double check if you subscribed, and thank you so much, because in a strange way, you're part of our history and you're on this journey with us, and I appreciate you for that. So yeah, thank you. Louis, to understand you, what is the earliest context that I need?
Something that played a massive role for me in my life was the fact that maybe for the first 4 or 5 years of my life, it was just me and my mum. My first proper memories are just kind of having like really kind of nice and warm and really like emotional conversations with my mum. I think something that I'm kind of proud of is that I find it easy to be emotional, and I kind of like talking about my feelings, and I like getting into conversation with other people about that. And that was definitely something that she instilled in me from like a really young age. And something that still definitely really helps me today, especially, you know, navigating through the life like I have. Those kind of things of being able to talk about your emotions and your feelings, like vitally important actually for the job that I do mentally, you know.
So your father wasn't around. Your biological father left soon after you were born?
Yeah, it's not really something I speak loads about, but I'm happy to. Yeah, he wasn't involved in my life at all. I've met him like 3 times ever.
So your mother played, I guess, several roles in your life.
Yeah, my mum was always really good at that. I think she realised the fact that my dad wasn't going to be around, that she had to play dad as well. And she had this kind of mischievous instinct in her, my mum, and definitely kind of inspired some of that. And part of that was her being her, but part of that was also trying to play that kind of dad role, you know, where you kind of lark about and encouraged to do kind of silly things that aren't going to hurt, you know. She was just like, I could get emotional talk about it. She's just the best woman I ever knew, definitely. And also just, I feel so vitally like lucky to be able to have her as my mentor, because she just, everything that I look to in like friends and partners, etc., they're the kind of things that she embodied, really.
And you had siblings?
Yeah.
Lots of them?
Yeah, lots of them. So when I grew up, like kind of like the bulk of my childhood, there was 7 of us living in a 3-bed house. I've got a little bit better at it, but one thing I really have struggled with is being on my own. And the more I've thought about that as I've got a bit older, it's because I just never had an opportunity to be when I was young. When you live in a house that, you know, it's 3-bedroom, there's 7 people living in it, you're literally all living on top of each other. And I loved that. Like, it was like one of the best things that ever happened to me being an older brother. Like, it's like one of the definitions of my purpose, I would say. I just like to look after people, man. So like, being an older brother is like a role I feel like I was always supposed to do. And then I think even, you know, as we move through life and a couple of things got more challenging, that role has become more prevalent, definitely.
I was fortunate enough to speak to quite a few people that have known you over the years.
I heard that was cool. That was cool.
Yeah, and I was just listening to some of the recordings of those conversations, like Nizam.
Yeah.
He's your childhood best friend.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Cal, who's your photographer and videographer.
Yeah, love Cal.
Throughout the years. And Lottie, who's your youngest sister, 6 years younger.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting that one of the things they all came back to is that you really haven't changed.
I appreciate that. I give me goosebumps.
Yeah, but that's what they said.
Like
your best friend from childhood said that's one of the most remarkable things, that you're still made out of the same stuff and you've never turned around and thought you were anything more than you were back then when he knew you.
And that's one thing I love about him, you know, as a friend. I've never said this to his face, but, you know, he's a real guy. Like, you know, he's never turned around to us and never said, oh, I'm this big shot now, or that ego, you know, that's never played, and he's never been embarrassed of us. You know, he's a real guy.
It's at least 50% conscious, that, or at least it started out as that idea. Because I think when you enter a crazy situation and One Direction being like the pinnacle of that idea, there's people around you that all of a sudden feel that used to feel really, really similar, and all of a sudden they feel really different. I'm not talking about day-to-day conversation, but I'm talking about stuff that we can relate to, problems that I might have had that I might, you know, talk to them about. And I think that's quite an alienating feeling. So instead of kind of just submitting, I've always resisted that. It's been really important to me. And those kind of things, you know, hearing that and hearing other people say that about me, that does make me really proud, because There's definitely, it's definitely a lifestyle that can kind of sweep you away. But I think the other side of that and getting swept away, I don't really like the idea of what that might look like. And I think you need people around you that are going to tell you if you're being a dick, like vitally important in this job, definitely. And those things, I think when you're surrounded, like a lot of successful people are, when you're surrounded only by success, it breeds a funny kind of narrative. To be respected from people in Doncaster like that means a lot to me, definitely. So that's another reason why, I wouldn't drive through the streets of Doncaster in a fucking Ferrari or whatever.
And you went to school in Doncaster, Hayfields?
Yeah, Hayfields where I did most of my time, and then I failed my A-levels and then went somewhere else for a year.
You failed your A-levels?
I failed my A-levels, yes. That was the first time I'd ever got a real bollocking off my mum. A real dressing down. Because she was really, really fair. But there was something that she was kind of strict on with schoolwork. And I remember getting in the car and she said, "You fucked your life up." And she never swore. And I remember, I got goosebumps thinking about it there. I remember thinking, maybe I need to do something with my life.
At 15, 16 years old, you joined a drama group. And I was watching actually just before you arrived. At 17 years old, you got the lead role in Grease. The foundations were set and you ultimately at 18 years old decide to go and audition?
Yeah, that was the third time I auditioned for the X Factor. So every year previous to that. So that would have made me 16 when I first auditioned. There's like 3 producer auditions and then you get to see Simon, it's the main one. And the first year, I didn't get through any of them. The second year, I got through the first round. And then for a final time, I said to myself, well, I'm going to give this one more shot. Because that was another thing at that age. It's one thing saying you're resilient. And I do think I am. But it's a lot easier to be resilient at that age as well. Definitely.
It's really surprising that someone would go to the X Factor once, be rejected essentially, go again, not make it, and then go again, without having their self-esteem or their confidence knocked to the point where they go, I'm not going to go through that again. Because every time you got to come home, you got to tell your friends and family, it didn't work out.
Yeah. Well, the first year I can remember it being utterly crushing. Like I'd not really had real rejection at that point. I hadn't really experienced that kind of thing. The second time I went was even more challenging because I went with what I'll describe as like the hottest girl at school at the time, right? So she's also a singer. We got talking like months ago. Turns out she wants to audition for the X Factor as well. I'm like, well, let's go together, thinking this could be like a smart little play. She goes before me. And I think at this point, I feel like I was still in the queue and she showed me that she got through to the next round. It was like a gold ticket. I then didn't get through. And then because I was with her, I was traveling with her, we then got ushered into a room of say 200 people and every single person in the room had a yes. I remember that being really, really challenging. You're just surrounded by people that are dreaming, they're really, really excited about what does the next stage look like. And that created a bit more fire, I think. It was like, okay, how do I get on the right side of this next year? How do I be in this group of people next year?
Did your mum play a role in you going for that third year?
I can't remember specifically, but I would say if I would have had any level of doubt, 100%. The musical that you just referenced that I did at school, I didn't want to go to that audition and she literally picked me up and drove me there. And I was so thankful that she did. She was often very, very good at, pushy parents that's not good. She was never like that. She always had the right amount of force, because sometimes you need that as a kid, and especially actually even as adults, in a situation where you're second guessing something, as soon as someone goes, go on, you can do it. You're okay. So I think that definitely played a big role in that. Even if I suggested that I wasn't going to go to this audition, throughout the year, she will have been giving me 100 different reasons to go. Now, not literally, but just from a confidence point of view, the way that she was talking to me, how she always used to put me on this amazing pedestal. She made me feel like I could do anything, definitely. And I think that helps in those kind of situations, going for it for a third time, because my mum's saying I can do it, so maybe I can.
So you do the audition where you saying, make you feel my love.
That was boot camp. So that was the second part of the audition. My first audition was a song called Hey There Delilah. Did nothing for me, like sonically. Like obviously now I can say this because I've got a bit more experience, but as a young lad, you're not thinking about any of these things. It was just, I like that song, I'll sing that song. It was bad. It was really, really bad. And to the point where like, it still makes me deeply uncomfortable, like listening to or watching that audition. The only thing I'd done like this is the school production of Grease. And that was to about 250 people over 2 nights. And that felt like a fucking mountain of people. Cut to then your live TV audition at the MEN in Manchester, and there's 3,000 people in the audience. 3,000 people is a big gig for anyone to play, like full stop. Like if you do 3,000 tickets, you're doing really, really well. So like it's the definition of being thrown at the deep end. And I think that's part of what they want. But it's not going to yield the best results from everyone. Some people it is, but I just remember feeling like a fucking deer in a headlights, like really, really shaky, like really, really, just felt really, really uncomfortable. I just wanted the ground to swallow me up. I'd never been in a situation where I was quite a confident young lad, so it wasn't very often I'd even been out of my comfort zone like that. And I just felt like a deer in the headlights, definitely.
Am I right in thinking that they probably had the idea to construct a band much sooner than...
They must have done.
You know what I mean?
Knowing Simon, I will have had these conversations with him in the past, but can't remember now. But knowing Simon, yeah, I think, you know what he's like, right? He will have had that in his mind for at least for the year before.
He loves a boy band as well. He's got a track record.
Yeah. They make him a lot of money.
And so you come third on the X Factor as a band when you were put together, and then you signed at 19 years old to Simon Cowell's Psycho Music. And it's crazy because when I think about you signing at 19 years old and I think about what happened in the preceding 5 or 6 years, I mean, it is crazy.
It's only now, outside of being in One Direction, that I actually have a little bit of a concept of what happened, and even, you know, the craziness of it, because nobody has any context to it before it happens. So we definitely, we felt like things were going really, really well. But we also, there will have been part of us, especially in that first year, of just assuming this is what, you know, success looks like. You know, a successful artist does these things. And the first moment that I remember distinctly, actually, that I realized that maybe this was bigger than, like, let's say, like the average thing at the time. We got booked on a support gig with a Disney band called Big Time Rush. And before that tour show, our manager, but our like senior manager, the kind of guy you only see, you know, like 6 gigs a year, and it just happens to be Vegas and LA and all the best places in the world, you know. And he sat us down, it was like this dressing down, and it was like, look, this is what you need to expect from a gig like this. I expect people to only know the singles, and even if they know the singles, you know, like that's a real win. They're not going to know the words to the album tracks. It's going to be a very, very different show to what you expected. So we're all ready to go out fighting, because we'd not really had that at that point. We'd had most things that we'd done, we felt really confident doing. So like we were kind of going on the back foot. And then I can remember when we walked out on stage, and I think we opened with something that wasn't a single, and people were just locked in, like massively locked in. And it was really, really fucking loud in there. And I think that was a moment where I remember, again, I had this kind of side to me when I was younger. I was so excited to tell Richard, who was our manager at the time, I was so excited to tell him post-gig about how it actually went. Did you see it then? Because that was obviously not how it played out. And I remember feeling pretty smug about that. But I think it was once I kind of got to bed that evening, I was kind of thinking, I wasn't overly deep thinker at that point, but I was still thinking occasionally on a deep level. And I'm looking at this music manager and I'm thinking, like, this guy's like uber experienced. Like, he's been in this situation countless times. So if he was to predict it wrong, like maybe he did, I'm like, well, maybe maybe something is happening.
How do you take care of yourself amongst that? Because, you know, one of the things I've learned from doing this podcast is I've learned so much about the brain. I've learned so much about dopamine and sleep and circadian rhythms and all these things. And so when I fit that into the context of what your life was like at an age where these neuroscientists tell me that the male brain is still growing, it's still forming itself, you're putting this tremendous external pressure on it. You're like shocking it every night. I remember when I interviewed Liam, your former bandmate, him telling me that he would he remembers walking out on stage, and I think it was Dubai, and there's like 100,000 people there, and then thrown in, you probably remember the gig, like thrown into the taxi, taken back to the hotel room and locked in there. And he was like, I remember him saying to me, it was stage, car, hotel, locked, stage, car, hotel, locked. Like, fuck.
I would say that the way that we both handled it, me and Liam, was quite different. I think that's often why I had a good relationship with Zayn from early on, because neither of us are kind of rule abiding, and not in a way that's like utterly disruptive. It's just we have our own ideas, and that at least alleviated a little bit of the pressure, knowing that deep down, if I wanted to just go and do something, I would genuinely just go and do it. Whereas I think Liam and the other boys, actually, to a degree, there was an element of a little bit of fear, I think, and also Liam had, he'd worked so hard from the age of 14 to get there. Liam's journey was a lot different to mine. I just felt like a happy-go-lucky guy who won the lottery, whereas Liam was very, very precise and deliberate, and he'd got there for all his hard work. So I think we also came from a slightly different point of view. Another benefit that I had during that time, and I still have, is I'm not a dweller. Like I'm an overthinker for sure, but I wouldn't say like I'm a dweller. So I wouldn't use this phrase with me very often, but like there's definitely an element of ignorance is bliss during that whole time.
I find it so fascinating that you talk about this idea of you having the minerals or the personality where you would push back against the system a little bit. Because when I spoke to your former cameraman and videographer, he said that you were the one in the group that stood up against the label. So you'd be the one to turn around to the record label and say, we need a day off. And it's interesting again, because one of the things I learned from doing this podcast is this idea of like learned helplessness and control and autonomy. Basically, TLDR it says that people who feel like they have control have much better physiological health outcomes. They have less stress, they're more insulated, better psychological states, less anxiety, less depression, because they feel like they're in control of the situation. So there's this crazy study that I was reading about when I was writing my last book about these rats, where they learn that they can't do anything about the situation, and they basically give up and they become submissive and they stop trying. And I think about this in the context of humans as well. And you're from what your videographer told me, Cam, you were clearly not that. You were clearly someone that would push against Simon Cowell's record label as a young man.
Yeah, and that's something I've had a few conversations with my friends, similar things about this, and I'm not certain where that was like inspired by, because it's brave, right? To stare someone who at the time, at least in pop, was one of the most successful people in the music industry and say, no, you've got it wrong. Here's me, an 18-year-old with no experience, telling you've got it wrong. I think what gave me confidence in those ideas is, even if it wasn't a collective voice, even if it was just my voice delivering the message, it was always with collective intention. It would always be for the good of all of us. Making those decisions now on my own, they're not quite as easy. There's a lot of different kind of things at play, but and again, it kind of comes from that big brother kind of role again. I was the oldest in the band. It was kind of my role in the band, I think, to kind of to do that. And I realized that by far I was the most opinionated in the band, definitely. So I think I wanted to use that for good and not just chatting shit about someone on Twitter or something. Another important distinction about One Direction is, this is not like disrespectful to Ed. Like, I appreciate I was in a boy band. I know that, right? But like, if there would be like one genre of music that I would think might be the most naff, it's boy band, if you could call that a genre. So going into One Direction when I was 18, growing up in the north of England, it's like real, it's kind of like snobby musically, there's like real music and then there's boy bands, So having that kind of feeling going into it was that was why it was easy to kind of push against some of these old school ideas, because they were the ideas that the reasons I didn't like these bands is because they all looked the same and because they all felt very kind of PR pressed, It was always a really interesting project for me to try and to look at One Direction and think, well, how could we make this a little cooler? I remember the real turning point in One Direction was when we put up the pre-order for our first single, What Makes You Beautiful. I can't remember the number of how much we sold that week, but we broke some record, right, at the pre-order, and we got told this, and we'd not released any music at this point. And I remember thinking, that's fascinating, because they don't know what it's going to sound like yet, but they're invested. That felt like power early on. And it also felt like that we could rewrite the rule book, because people were invested in us as much, if not more, than the music. I think that's fair to say. Was
there a part in the evolution and the journey of One Direction where you had that moment where you go, there's elements of my life that I love, that I no longer have access to because of this success?
I would say that it's more gradual than that, really. You know, you start to lose some of your own independence to a degree. And then I think also the age I was, right? So like I was 18 when I first joined the band. And I always say this, that year of my life before I auditioned for the X Factor, at least up to those 18 years, was the best year of my life. You know, you've got independence at that point. I was driving. You could go out. Like it was so fascinating socially. There's always something to do. So to leave that behind was quite gutting, actually. And that took me a second to get used to it first. Now, I always felt incredibly grateful and really excited every time I was doing something with One Direction. But any kind of time for reflection, I was really, really missing home. Like me and Zayn when we were younger, we had countless conversations of like, you know, should we just pack it in? Should we just call it a day?
Why?
Because you feel alienated. You are living this lifestyle that, and there's a million different reasons, right? But like the fame thing's really difficult. And mostly for me, it was about being alienated. And I can't, like any of my life experience was now not so relevant to some of my friends, you know. And I think that also I think this is part of growing up in a working class town, but I have this like guilt for the success and money that I've earned as well. And I think that also is kind of part of the same thing. I think it's kind of like two different things. The fame thing, I'll never be okay with. Like if I, like, of course every artist says this, but if I could just do the music, you know, that would be amazing. That would be amazing. I suppose I could on a lower level, but I wouldn't get the same rush that I do. I think it's almost, it's almost everything else that comes with that.
It's interesting when someone says they felt isolated, which is something I've had a lot from people who've had great public success where they've got a big fan base, because we think of like isolation as not being around people. But I guess isolation in the context you describe it is more about connecting to people, relatability.
Yeah, but it's also like the metaphor would be like, what's that really famous crossing in Japan? If you took a drone shot and you pulled right out from that and you would just become a little dot amongst the noise. Sometimes that's kind of how it feels. Because also it's not the real world. You know, the even in the way that people perceive you is not the real world. The first moment that One Direction got, the first big pay packet was a merchandise deal that we got. And we always did really good merch.
How old were you?
19. That was the first kind of moment where I felt really, really excited. And so I rang my mum straight away and, you know, told her about it like I always would. And she was really excited for me. And obviously, you know, she's just proud. That's it. And then I remembered the feeling of, but who else do I tell now? Because, like, do I call up Nizam and tell him? Well, he'll be into that and he'll be really proud of me. But bear in mind, he's just seen me on the X Factor. And this is another thing I realized about people is they think if you're successful, then everything is just, you know, successful and that's how it goes. So I think, you know, I didn't call Nizam, but if I had called him, he probably would have been really nice, but in his head would have shrugged his shoulders like, well, obviously, you know, things are going really well for you. So I think there's definitely a lack of like understanding there, rightly so. There's also a guilt, you know, especially at that age. People, like, life's really, really expensive at that age. People are like up to their eyes in student loans. It was only about 2 years ago that I put all the plaques up on my wall at home and my awards, like the Brit Awards and stuff that I got in the past from the band. They still annoy me even now in my lounge. Because like if I'm having a conversation with someone, I don't even really want, like I want to just be me. I don't want to be that guy that won those awards. Like we can be and we can conversate like that, but truthfully, like if Nizam came over to my house for like a chat and a coffee, I would hate that the conversation might end up then gravitating to me or my success. It's much more about just what those relationships and conversations look like in the real world. That's what I'm craving, is that real normality. All I want is to just be on an even playing field with everyone in any kind of conversation. I think that was the toughest thing to deal with, is just the lack of normality in every sense of the word.